Title: The Colonel abused the girls, but paid the price. When Lampião found out for years, a powerful colonel believed he was above the law. He abused the girls of the Sertão as if they were his property, spreading fear and silence wherever he went. But everything changed when one name echoed among the cowboys and bandits: Lampião. And what happened next, you will discover now, because this story isn't in the books, but it marked the fate of an entire village. Have you heard of the day Lampião traded his rifle for justice? It wasn't robbery. It wasn't revenge. It was something greater. A lady from the Sertão, desperate, asked for help, and Lampião answered. What he and his gang did in that village became legend and changed everything. If this story grabs you, don't forget, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Now listen, the sun cracked the ground of the Sertão when Lampião appeared through the dust. He and his men rode in silence, guns crossed on their chests, sharp eyes sniffing out danger in the dry brush. They arrived slowly in a quiet village. No noise, no threat. They seemed to only seek a sip of water and a bit of shade. But that day, fate had other plans. In the middle of the simple square, with the ground beaten down, between the peeling white little church and the small market, covered with worn-out tarpaulins, a figure emerged, as if from the very fabric of time. An old lady, bent over, walked as if carrying the world on her shoulders. She wore a cotton cloth already faded, and a stained scarf hid her white hair. But what hurt the most was the gaze, low, dull, as if even the earth were ashamed to hear what she carried in her heart. When Lampião dismounted, firm, with his rifle hanging and his hat gleaming under the midday sun, she didn't flee. She wasn't afraid. She walked toward him, her legs trembling, stopping right in front of the captain. She knelt, without hesitation, without caring who watched. "My son, for the love of God, listen to me." Lampião was taken aback. It was common to see people kneel out of fear. But in the eyes of that woman, it wasn't fear. It was contained anger. It was a pain that never went away, a pain that screamed without making a sound. He approached slowly, tipped his hat and responded seriously. "Speak, madam, I'm listening." She raised her eyes, swallowed hard, and spoke in a tone almost whispered, just for him. "Colonel Severo destroyed my granddaughter. The girl is 15. Her brother tried to stop him, and now he's lying there between life and death. They beat him until the blood stopped flowing. And nobody here speaks up, because those who do vanish, just like their father, who disappeared 3 months ago." Lampião's eyes widened. He fell silent for a moment. The hush grew heavy, but the old woman did not stop. "I didn't come asking for alms, nor for the law's justice. I came asking for justice from someone with an ounce of shame, from someone who does what must be done. They say you're ruthless, but I'd rather trust a ruthless man who keeps his word than a good man who pretends not to see." Lampião drew a deep breath. He looked around. Not one of his riders spoke. And the villagers? All silent, like extras in a John Ford Western, waiting for the marshal's order. "Where does he live?" Lampião asked, steady. "Up on the hill, in a big house surrounded by goons. Folks call it a palace, but what it really is a dressed-up prison." Lampião knelt, gently took the old woman's hands and helped her stand. "Rise, ma'am. Today, God sent word." She tried to speak, but tears fell. She said no more. Lampião then turned to his 2 fastest riders, Corisco and Midnight. "Follow the cattle trail. I want to know how many men guard that place, how the land lies, the entries, any hole in the fence, everything." But without drawing attention, then he faced the rest of his gang. "No one draws a gun. No one raises their voice. Today, we move like shadows. If anyone asks, say we only came for water." The villagers listening from afar didn't know whether to run or to give thanks. Some bowed their heads as if they'd already lost everything. Others just watched, as if Judgment Day were riding in on horseback. Lampião then walked slowly to the little white church. He stopped at the closed door, laid his hand on the wood, lifted his eyes to the sky, and murmured, "If it is God's will, let the righteous not perish." At that very moment a gentle breeze stirred, setting the dry leaves dancing. A flock of birds tore through the sky as if something unseen had been set free. The old woman, still standing, wiped a tear and whispered, "He heard. Lord Lampião, he heard." Lampião narrowed his eyes. Blood began to boil within him. But he knew too much anger ruined the shot, like a gunslinger who forgets his aim in a Clint Eastwood western. To face a colonel wielding power, bullets alone weren't enough. It demanded patience. It demanded faith. It demanded time. That night, the band did not rest. It was the silence before the storm, like the hush before a final showdown in a John Wayne epic. When the sun rose, the village awoke strangely. Not even the roosters crowed. The wind crept slowly, and even the dogs seemed to whisper. Villagers peered through door cracks. They murmured in corners. No one dared speak above a whisper. Word spread like wildfire. Lampião was in town, and this time he wasn't here to steal. He had come to deliver justice. High atop the hill sat Colonel Severo Nogueira's mansion, as if mocking the suffering. Below, it looked like a palace. Tower, veranda, barns, even its own pond. But those living in its shadow called it a gilded prison. Severo had been feared since youth. He'd inherited lands from his father, friends with capital's power brokers, and wielders of hired guns like a reaper's scythe. Yet it was Severo who turned the town into a corral of fear. He bought judges, he bought priests, he even bought silence, and what money couldn't purchase, his thugs solved with bullets. It wasn't rare for a girl to vanish for days. Some returned silent, with hollow eyes. Others never came back. Those who spoke disappeared. Those who cried were silenced. Fear ruled them all. Late that afternoon, Carisco and Midnight returned from their reconnaissance, dust-covered and eyes wide. "About 20 gunmen," Carisco reported. "Some stand watch up front, others lie in ambush among the rocks." "And the house?" Lampião asked, hand on his chin, mind racing like a strategist in a classic Western standoff. "2 stories, with the kitchen at the back and its own entrance. The horses are tied by the pond. Up front there's a wide courtyard, big enough for a church wedding," Carisco said, his voice brimming with intelligence, like a detailed briefing from an undercover agent in a heist film. Lampião listened intently, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if mapping every angle in his mind. "And the entry points?" he asked, not tearing his gaze from the mental map forming in his head. 4, front gate, back gate, a side hatch the staff use, and an old tunnel into the woods. But it looks sealed off," Midnight added, his tone grave as a war reporter describing enemy fortifications. Lampião closed his eyes briefly. The plan was unspooling in his mind like a spool of film. It had to be swift, it had to be silent. It was the only way to cut the snake's head without it sensing the blade. Meanwhile, tension rippled through the village. People didn't know whether to run, pray, or brace for the worst, like civilians caught between rivals in an urban thriller. But there was something new in the air, a spark flickering in the darkness, a blend of fear and a deep hunger for justice, even if delivered by the backland's own shadow. Lampião walked the dusty streets with head bowed, but eyes sharp. He watched every movement, noted where the gunmen stood, who lingered by whom, and where the local constables hid. He knew Severo's power didn't rest on bullets alone. He wielded fear like a chain, and the whole village was shackled to it. In the center of the square, a young woman appeared. She wore a pale dress, her eyes dull, as if the world had drained the color from them. She crossed Lampião's path. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. She said nothing, just bowed her head and walked on. But that look said everything. Lampião's blood boiled anew. He felt rage flicker inside him like a candle set to wind. Here's the adapted English version, crafted to preserve the rhythm, intensity, and meaning of your original Brazilian story, but adjusted so an American audience can fully connect with the characters and setting. That night, the gang gathered. Beneath a dry, twisted tree on the outskirts of town, the air was heavy, thick with tension. The wind itself seemed to carry the weight of what was coming. "He thinks he's God," someone muttered, spitting into the dust. "And folks here, they forgot what it's like to live without fear. But we'll remind them, and to do that, we cut the snake's head off before it even sees the blade." Carisco narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "You thinking we hit the front gate?" Lampião shook his head, steady and calm. "No, we disappear. Let him think we're gone. While he celebrates, we bleed him from the inside. The workers, the ranch hands," he continued, "they've seen too many girls vanish, too many bodies left in the woods. They're ready. We'll slip in through them." "What if he gets wise?" Meia-Noite asked, raising a skeptical brow. Lampião's smile was cold, but purposeful. "Then it's war. But not the kind fought in the shadows. This time, it'll have a face, a name. The kind of war these people need to see." That night, two men were chosen for the most dangerous mission, Farolo and Trinca Eixo. They'd go deep into Colonel Severo's ranch, disguised as starving cowhands, refugees from the drought, desperate for work. They could talk their way out of trouble, handle cattle like they were born for it. But their true skill was killing without making a sound. Before they left, Lampião handed each of them an old yellowed prayer card. "Keep it in your pocket. It protects more than bullets ever will. And remember, this is justice, not revenge. His fate's not ours to decide." By morning, the village exhaled a sigh of relief, or so it seemed. Word spread that Lampião and his men had gone. Some were glad, others quietly heartbroken, but not the old woman, and not her granddaughter, who rose from her hammock with eyes red from grief and a soul burning for justice. And certainly not Lampião, who still watched. From the ridge above, rosary wrapped tight around his wrist, hand resting firm on the stock of his rifle. The sky was streaked with grey, as if even the heavens sensed what was coming. The townsfolk crept from their homes with cautious steps. Their eyes still darted, unsettled. La Lagoinha, the small stretch between the village and the ridge, felt like it hung between two worlds, one of fear and one of change. The rumor of Lampião's departure spread like wildfire. Some took comfort in it, others quietly mourned. But none knew the truth. The gang was still out there, breathing quietly among the trees and the dry ravines of the hills. Later that morning, Lampião rode alone to a crooked little shack, home, to one of the region's most respected figures, Dona Arlinda, the healer. They said her hands were heavy and her prayers even heavier. Said she could make evil bleed with a handful of herbs. And most importantly, no hired gun dared cross her gate without tipping his hat. She was in the backyard, back turned, puffing on a bent old pipe. She didn't flinch at the sound of hoofbeats. She just said, "I know why you came, Lampião, but beware. Whoever stirs a serpent best know where they step." Lampião dismounted, respectful. He took off his hat and held it to his chest. "I came to learn if this road is God's or the devil's." She turned slowly. Her eyes were deep, dark, like a well carved into stone. She looked through him, not at him. Then, wordless, she entered the house. He followed. Inside, the smell of smoke and crushed leaves filled the air. In the corner sat a wooden table, cluttered with melted candles, knotted rosaries, and dusty saints. Dona Arlinda lit a candle and murmured words in Latin, foreign to Lampião's ears, but they stirred something in his gut, like magic or a warning. She blew pipe smoke across a basin of water. The silence thickened. Even the walls seemed to be holding their breath. She stared into the basin as if reading the surface like scripture. "I saw your path, Lampião." Her voice was low, but steady. "I saw blood, a sacred yard in flames, a woman's heart crying for justice." She paused, long enough to let it settle. "But I also saw a man wrapped in darkness." Lampião didn't reply. He closed his eyes, took in a deep breath. The smoke still twisted in the air like a serpent. Then she knelt by an old chest and pulled out a rosary made of black beads. Each bead scarred with tiny cuts, promises made in the edge of life and death. This one's seen 3 wars and 4 deaths. "It can't be bought, can't be borrowed. If you take it, you carry it to the end." Lampião reached out. She tied the rosary to his wrist like someone binding fate to flesh, then touched his forehead with one finger and whispered, "A spirit of pain will rise this week, but justice will only come if it's delivered by someone who suffered." Lampião furrowed his brow. "Someone's going to die?" "No," she said, eyes locked on his. "Someone's going to be set free. Here's the continuation of your script, translated and adapted into English for an American audience, with the same cinematic style and emotional rhythm preserved." Outside, the wind picked up. Dust and dry leaves began to swirl across the yard, like the backlands themselves had stopped breathing. Lampião mounted his horse and rode off without another word. Wrapped around his wrist was the black rosary from the healer, in his pocket the scapular from the old woman in the village, and in his chest a fire that had long been waiting. A fire not for gold, not for revenge, but for something deeper. Faith. As he descended the ridge, far above, Colonel Severo's estate began to take on a festive look. Colourful flags flapped over the yard. Barrels of liquor were rolled into place. Word was there'd be a party to celebrate the arrival of 2 new ranch hands, but behind every laugh, there was the scent of fear. Ferolho and Trinca Eixo were already on the inside, blended into the cattle and grease. One worked the stables, the other the kitchen, and in between their chores they reported back every detail. How many gunmen, how much gunpowder, which hallways stayed empty at night. The messages reached Lampião through a mute orphan boy who sold flour in the village. No one suspected him, and it was through him that the note came. "The party's Saturday night. The colonel sleeps upstairs. After midnight, only 2 guards at the back gate." Lampião read it, folded it, and for the first time in days, he smiled with his eyes. The plan was in motion, and the Sertão was about to tremble. As twilight fell, and silence began swallowing the last sounds of day, Lampião gathered his most trusted men, Corisco, Maia Noite, and 3 others, killers who never missed and never left a trace. "Thursday's St. Anthony's Day, ain't it?" Lampião said with a half-smile. "They say he's the saint of weddings. Well, we're about to marry justice and gunpowder." Corisco let out a dry chuckle, more throat than mouth. "And the moon?" Lampião answered with a look. "Full. Lights up sins better than any lantern." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of what was coming settled in. Lampião rose slowly, looked each man in the eyes, one by one. "We go in without warning. When his back's turned, drunk on what he stole from this town, we show him what happens to men who think they're bigger than God." That night, no one slept. Not out of fear, out of anticipation. The kind of tension that comes before thunder. Lampião lay in the dark, rosary tight around his wrist, murmuring prayers like a man whispering to the heavens. He didn't ask God to ignore the rifle, only to understand the reason it was in his hands, and while the plan ripened among stones, thorns, and faith. Wednesday came dark before its time. The sky over Alagoinha filled with heavy, low-hanging Clouds, as if the heavens themselves were bracing for what was to come. In the village, people walked fast. Heads down, eyes avoiding each other. The colonel's party was the talk of every corner. There'd be music, food, cachaça, and tragedy, hiding beneath the streamers. Everyone knew Severo's parties. That's when he flaunted it all. His power, his impunity. He summoned the poorest girls. Some came out of fear, some out of foolish hope. Some never came back. The men of the village pretended not to see. Pretended because they knew. To see was to disappear. But this year, this party, fate was sitting in the crowd. From high in the hills, hidden among thorns and jagged stone, Lampião and his men watched. Their lookout was dry and quiet, but it gave them the perfect view of the ranch below. Like God had placed that rock just for them. Lampião picked up a thin branch and began to draw in the dirt. "This is how we do it," he said, eyes focused on the lines. "The party kicks off late afternoon. The gunmen will be armed, but drunk. The liquor will dull them. Their guard will slip. Then we split into 3 teams. One goes through the brush out back, another through the kitchen cellar, and the third straight in across the main yard, all on cue, all after the signal." Mayanoite scratched his chin, doubtful. "What's the signal?" Lampião looked up at the dark sky, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, with the calm of a man who'd already counted the dead, he said, "When the accordion stops playing." Carisco, leaning against a stone, let out a crooked grin. "And what if there ain't no accordion? Here's the continuation of your..." Translated and adapted script in the same cinematic, narrative-rich tone for an international American audience. Lampião didn't blink. "Then it'll be when the dogs start barking. They always sense it first." The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was understanding. This wasn't just an ambush, it was reckoning. An ancient call from the backlands. It was time turning against those who thought they owned everything. Ferrolho and Trinca Eixo already knew every corner of that estate. They slept little, spoke less, and watched everything. "There's 2 gunmen that are all bark," Trinca Eixo muttered, crouched in the shadow of a cactus. "One of 'em, Malachias, he shakes at thunder. You take him out first, and the rest'll scatter like animals running from fire." Lampião listened without blinking. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a red cloth, neatly folded. "This'll be tied to the front gate, if you see it waving." The colonel's already roped. Everyone understood. That was the signal, the end of waiting. Lampião looked around at his men. They weren't saints, they weren't soldiers, they were outlaws. But in that moment, they were something else. They were the muffled scream of the people, the fury of the wounded land. They were the end of shame. Severo thinks he owns everything. Women, other people's children, land. He thinks he can soil anything he wants and still laugh about it. Lampião clenched the black rosary wrapped around his wrist, like a prayer gritted through his teeth. Well, that laugh's gonna be his last. Carisco, always the hothead, stepped closer, eyes burning. "And what if the other colonels hear we came for Severo?" Lampião raised his head slowly. "Let 'em hear, let 'em tremble, let 'em know this land has no master. Whoever lays hands on innocent women will wake up with the devil whispering in their ear." That very night, the gang split. 3 cangacheros went down first, dressed as ordinary ranch hands. Rusty rifles slung over their backs just for show. They'd slip into the party like they belonged, smiles on the surface, but with fingers itching beneath the skin, they'd blend in. Among the fake laughter, the smoke of roasting meat, the stink of warm liquor, they'd move through the party like shadows in disguise. Shirts open at the chest, battered hats, soft-spoken swagger, no one would suspect a thing. Meanwhile, 4 others cut through the woods, pushing past thorns and barbed wire, silent as snakes on hot ground. Lampião and the rest, 6 in all, waited on the ridge. They were the storm front. What came next wouldn't just be a raid. It would be a reckoning, for every night the backlands cried and no one listened. The mute boy, the same one who carried messages like a voiceless angel, left early with one last note in his pocket. He walked calmly to the estate, pretending to sell flour, and handed the message to Ferrolo. Inside, just one sentence: "When the accordion goes quiet, the certain will sing of justice." From the top of the ridge, Lampião saw it all. The estate began to glow slowly, as if hell itself were lighting up with lanterns. Men carried trays. Women, eyes downcast, rushed past, and the colonel, fat, sweating, with a soul dirtier than the cattle pens, laughed loud on the veranda, surrounded by girls with painted smiles. It was a familiar scene, a tragic play on repeat. But tonight, the script had changed. The moon rose full, bloated with light and silence, and from the heights, with eyes locked on the great house, Lampião whispered softly, like a man in prayer, "May God forgive those who deserve forgiveness, because what comes next is fire, lead, and redemption." And the night dropped heavy, suffocating, as if the backlands themselves were holding their breath. Below, the party burst with laughter and shouts. The accordion wailed like a cry for help. A skinny accordionist in dark glasses tore into the keys, with the fury of someone who knew. This night was different. On the porch, 3 women danced. Fake smiles, slow hips, eyes lost far away. Gunmen sprawled around the yard, drinking until they dropped. One flat on the grass, another acting like the king of the world. Arm wrestling, drunken brawls, more cachaça, more shouting. At the center, the colonel's table looked like an altar of sin. Roast goat, corn, flour. Bottles opened, and a cup always full in Severo's fat hand. But there was something different in the air, a scent of ending, a silence hiding behind the music. Time itself, bracing to turn. Colonel Severo looked like a fat hog ready for slaughter, red-faced, soaked in sweat, laughing with cachaça-stained teeth. A crumpled silk scarf hung loosely around his neck. "Tonight we forget the misery," he bellowed. "I'm the law here, and if anyone don't like it, let 'em run to the woods like animals." The laughter came quick, dishonest, hollow. His loyal lackeys clapped and toasted, choking on their own crooked laughs. Others just watched, eyes dirty with intent, staring at the young women serving food with fear behind their lashes. Outside, the hunt had already begun. Around the estate, the cangacheros moved like shadows on a moonless night. Ferrolo, beside the horses, pretended to wash water buckets. Trinca Eixo stirred pots in the kitchen like any regular servant. And the 3 disguised as cowhands were already scattered among the workers. Sharp eyes, steady hands, ready to strike. Corisco and Maya Noite crawled through the brush, squeezing between rocks, thorns, and dry leaves that cracked under their knees. They froze at a short, sharp whistle. There was the mute boy, lying flat on the ground like a cornered armadillo, pointing toward the slope. At the main gate, swaying gently in the wind, Lampião's red cloth danced like a sentence handed down from the gods. The signal. Inside the party, Ferrolo's eyes went wide as he saw the colonel raise his glass and bark with the grin of a devil. "Bring that new girl, the one from last week. She dances tonight or sleeps in the cell." Ferrolo's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew who she was. The old woman's granddaughter. Across the yard, Trinca Eixo wiped his hands on a greasy rag, eyes locked on the scene. When he saw 2 enforcers shove the girl, head bowed, toward the clearing, he moved. Fast, silent. Out back a farmhand waited. He handed over a shotgun wrapped in burlap. Trinca Eixo took it with the calm of a man who's seen hell before. And then the accordion stopped. It was like time fell into a pit. The music died suddenly, leaving behind a silence thick, dry, terrifying. The colonel squinted, turning his bloated face slowly, still drunk and swaying. "What the hell? Why'd it stop?" The accordionist, a tiny man in dark glasses, swallowed hard and stammered, Ah, the string broke. But he knew. They all knew. This night wasn't meant for dancing. It was meant for reckoning. The question still lingered on Severo's lips when the first gunshot tore through the night. It wasn't a warning. It was judgment. The bullet hit a guard leaning on the porch. His body crumpled silently, but the yard exploded in a storm of shouts, footsteps, and fear, thick in the air. From the edge of the woods, the cangacheros surged forward, as if they had risen from the earth itself. Their aim was sharp, their hands steady. One gunman collapsed, eyes wide, not even knowing what hit him. Another barely raised his rifle, took a shot straight through the forehead. Ferrolo, hidden among the horse troughs, pulled a revolver stashed beneath the watering barrel and shot down a charging thug. Trinca slammed the kitchen door shut and swept the back lot with lead, clearing a path for his brothers in arms. At the front of the manor, Corisco stormed in like a war demon, face streaked with coal, knife in hand, hat low, eyes on fire. He kicked open the front door and roared like thunder. Maya Noite followed like lightning, dropping 2 men with the butt of his shotgun before they could even scream. And then he appeared, Lampião, eyes burning, black rosary tight around his wrist. Rifle across his chest, he stepped into the yard like a man entering church, each footstep deliberate, his gaze slicing the air, silence pulsing between each gunshot. "No one touches the women," he shouted. "Run and you surrender. Raise a gun and you die." His voice cracked through the air like a divine decree. The farm workers, simple men, wearing no uniforms and carrying no guilt, dropped to the ground with hands over their heads. They knew. Lampião didn't kill the innocent. Strange as it seemed, justice had entered that house. The colonel, stumbling and soaked in sweat, tried slipping out the back. But Ferrolo caught him. "Where you going, pig?" Severo flailed, but Ferrolo struck him in the gut with the butt of his shotgun. The colonel fell, groaning, silk scarf now stained with vomit and blood. Out in the courtyard, the old woman's granddaughter saw everything. She stood frozen, trembling, eyes locked on Lampião. He approached slowly, a strange softness flickering in his gaze. "Stay calm," he said. "He's going to pay now." Around them, the world was collapsing. Screams, gunshots, smoke. The party had become a war zone, but at the eye of the storm, right there in the yard, between dust and bloodied bodies, Lampião stood tall. The colonel knelt. And justice had its finger on the trigger. "Tomorrow this village wakes up with no master," Lampião said, his eyes locked on his enemy. "And justice has only just begun." The dawn became fire, dust, and reckoning. Gunmen fell with cachaça still on their lips. Colonel Severo's party ended the only way it could, with bullets, shame, and silence. Lampião walked among the fallen like a man reciting prayers. A vengeful angel, shotgun in hand, rosary wrapped tight around his wrist, and every command from his lips was a full stop. Tie the living, leave the dead for the sun. The order came sharp, final. His men obeyed without question. They were forged in the fires of the Cangacho, used to walking through hell. But that night, something had changed in their eyes. They weren't there for gold, not even for revenge. They were there because the people of the Backlands had finally found someone to speak for them, and that someone was Lampião. In the center of the yard, amidst broken glass and dust, Colonel Severo lay in ruins, fat, sweaty, bleeding, humiliated. 2 cangacheros held him by the arms as he continued to flail with what pride he had left. "Run this town," he shouted. "You're messing with power." Lampião knelt beside him, eyes narrow like a honed blade. "Power over what, Colonel? The pain of the poor, the daughters you stole, the silence you bought with liquor." The colonel spat blood and fury. "I got friends in high places, politicians, police. You'll pay for this." Lampião smiled. But it wasn't joy, just certainty. "Not more than the girls you treated like cattle." Then he pointed to the veranda, never taking his eyes off the man on the ground. "Bring them out." His men climbed the steps slowly, as if carrying open wounds. 4 young women descended, frightened, shrunken, none older than 20. Lampião looked at each one with respect, lowered his hat, silenced the courtyard. "Tonight you speak, and no one shuts you up again." The oldest, eyes filled with tears, stepped forward. "He did this to all of us, said he could, said he owned the land and us." Outside, people had begun to gather, slowly, cautiously, like mourners entering a house of grief. But what they found there wasn't death. It was justice. From the crowd, the old woman appeared, holding her granddaughter's hand, the girl who had been violated. She looked pale, weak, but she stood, and when she saw the colonel on the ground, something lit up in her eyes. Lampião approached the two. He pulled from his satchel a white-handled pistol, small, light. Without a word, he placed it in the girl's hands. "I won't judge him. My men won't. This is yours." His voice sliced the silence like a blade through leather. In the middle of the courtyard, with the sun still hidden, with gunpowder in the air and blood in the soil, the girl held the pistol with both hands. She looked down, then at the trembling man before her. The colonel, the pig, the face of fear. "He killed my father, my childhood, my soul," she whispered. Lampião nodded slowly, his gaze full of truth. "And you'll let him laugh again." The world stopped. She walked forward, bare feet touching the warm mud of vengeance. She stood before the man who had played God for so long. Now, he begged like a beast, but there was no regret in his eyes, only terror at being on the wrong end of the barrel. She raised her arm, 1 second of silence, 1 sharp shot. The colonel collapsed, face to the sky, eyes wide, as if death had come too fast for his pride to understand. And then nothing, no screams, no steps, not even wind, just silence. But soon it cracked, a sob, a cry, relief, the kind of sound that doesn't come from the throat, it comes from the ground. Lampião stepped forward, took the pistol from her hands, held her in his arms, like closing a sacred pact. "Now it's done. The village can sleep, but justice doesn't sleep early." He gave the order. Barns burned, hidden weapons destroyed. The surviving gunmen tied up and dropped at the village entrance with a note pinned to their chests. Justice came before the law. As the flames devoured the barns, the sky began to lighten. It was a new day, the first in many years, a day with no master. Lampião gathered his men in the courtyard, now silent like a cemetery after the burial. The old woman prayed. Her granddaughter stood surrounded by girls who were finally breathing again, and the people, they stood tall, whole, steady, with heads held high. "Today you buried your fear," Lampião said. "But don't forget, evil loves to be reborn. And when it does, remember, justice knows how to carry a rifle too." Corisco stepped forward. "What now, Captain?" Lampião looked up at the sky, then at the black rosary wrapped around his wrist. "Now we leave. The ones who had to fall have fallen." They mounted their horses without hurry, left the estate burning, like an altar to justice. They took no gold, left behind no fear, only smoke rising, and the scent of land finally freed. In the village, the morning arrived differently. The sun didn't bring heat. It brought relief. The doors, once locked under orders of fear, now opened slowly, as if the people had to touch freedom with their own hands to believe it was real. The smoke still marked the sky like a scar. But what spread through the streets was something else. The scent of courage, of reclaimed voices, of fear, dead and buried. Lampião left behind no riches, only memory. He took no cattle, only the silence, shattered. The people stepped out of their homes with care, as if learning to walk again. In the town square, hugs returned. The tears were cleansing, and the children ran as if they'd never known the taste of silence. The village was washed, not with water, but with blood, sweat, and faith. In the church, the priest knelt before the altar, eyes full of tears. One of the girls stepped in, slowly, lit a candle. May this place never need bullets to find justice again. And far away, atop the dusty road, Lampião dismounted. Corisco, Maya Noite, and the others stood in silence, waiting. The captain walked to the stone that overlooked the village, rested his rifle on his shoulder, pulled from his pocket the scapular given to him by the old woman. He kissed it, put it away. "Mission accomplished, Captain?" Corisco asked. Lampião gazed at the horizon, eyes filled with things only the Backlands could understand. He breathed deep. God's mission, sometimes it speaks through the mouth of the poor. That old woman reminded me, not every bullet comes from revenge. Sometimes it comes from faith. He stood still for a moment. No words, no rush, only the wind of the Backlands dancing through the thorns. Lampião took the black rosary from his wrist and tied it carefully to a branch of mandacaru cactus. "This one stays to protect what we left behind." Corisco raised an eyebrow. "You're leaving the rosary, Captain?" Lampião smiled, almost sadly. It already did what it needed to do. Here, it became a shield. He mounted his horse once more. But before riding off, he looked at his men, gave that slight smile, the one that came when danger had passed. "Let's go. Before they start calling us saviors." The men laughed, that low, quiet laugh of men who live between bullets and silence. But it was real. They rode down the dry road, kicking up dust like a procession without saints, but with purpose, and as they disappeared into the distance, the village grew smaller. But the story didn't. That one was already turning into legend. Months later, the people of the Backlands told it differently. There was a village where Lampião took no gold, no women, no fear, only left behind justice and a note. At the door of the church, they found the paper, folded, handwritten, bold. "Our faith is what separates us from beasts, and justice is what brings us closer to God." From that day on, silence became respect. Fear never took root again, and when some powerful man tried to rule with threats, there was always someone who whispered softly just to remind them, "Careful. The captain still rides through these lands." Even if only in memory. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more legends of the hero of the Backlands. Because in the Sertão, justice never dies. And the stories of Lampião, my friend, they never end.